one of those times as they happen. I've just got one of those stories that I came across today, and I'm working on something for One American News. I'm working on a special, and so I didn't really have time to do a full Periscope. But this is a story which, I got to tell you, it really stuck with me today when I first read it. And even though it's late, I think it's something that I've got to share with all of you. So we've got a very twisted case here, and of course it's all alleged, and we haven't seen official charges yet because the arrest and the booking just took place. The story broke this morning. The incident took place over the weekend, Santa Cruz, California, up in the mountains. But, essentially there was an ambush killing of a police officer and an attack on two deputies, sheriff's deputies there in Santa Cruz County. And the suspect in all of this, the suspect in this is an Air Force active duty MP, a staff sergeant. This is up in Santa Cruz. Now, this is a guy who the San Francisco Chronicle, and I waited all day before I could put this out because I wanted it to be confirmed, right? I didn't want to jump on it. I wanted to wait. But the San Francisco Chronicle says that this guy, this Air Force MP, made anti-fascist posts on Facebook before allegedly committing an ambush killing of police officers. In addition, the FBI is currently investigating this individual in the ambush killing of a federal. Do you remember the federal agent who was killed in Oakland about 2 weeks ago? Well, the FBI is investigating whether or not this same individual, who is, again, an Air Force MP, active duty, committed these acts. And his white van was reported to have guns and pipe bombs inside of it. This is a guy who was trained, and if this is in fact the guy, and there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts in this, but this is a guy. His background was full military. He's been active duty military for 10 plus years, and he was actually a member of the Air Force MP's elite anti-terrorism training called the Ravens. So he was an Air Force Raven. He had training in explosives that he learned from the military, from anti-terrorism training. And then he used that training and his weapons training against police officers. And now what's really interesting is if you look at this guy's Facebook, and again, it's still alleged. He hasn't been tried yet, so I want to be clear about that. But looking at the Facebook post of this guy, it seems that early on Facebook, he considered himself a libertarian. And he actually referred to himself as a libertarian in the 2020 election. However, there are also posts from him that have been described as anti-fascist. And that it seems to be that he came to saw the police and law enforcement, if this is all to be believed, and again, this is reporting from the San Francisco Chronicle, the local AB7 there, ABC7, you can go check that out. So his Facebook page and his last post was actually an anti-fascist post. He came to view the police themselves in the United States as an anti-fascist force, as a fascist force, and that he viewed himself as someone who could rise up against it. In fact, on video, when when he was arrested, he said, "This is what it's about. This is about you, police." Right? And so now you've got a situation where this strikes me as very interesting, because to potentially get the involvement or the response of people who are trying to come in, so that later then they can sort of commit acts of anti-government activity. I see that we're having connection issues. I haven't left, guys. Apologize if there's any connection issues going on. So we'll see what's going on. Yeah, Deep State's trying to shut us down. Deep State's trying to shut down our live transmission. But it seems as though this guy strikes me as someone who started out possibly being a supporter of the libertarian-leaning Boogaloo movement, or Boogaloo meme. It's not a movement, it's a meme. And then later became radicalized. And if you go through his Facebook posts, you start seeing him post extremely angrily about police brutality. You then actually see him using posts talking about defunding police. So the same guy talked about defunding police. He later then posted what the San Francisco Chronicle referred to as an anti-fascist screed. And he has now been arrested and charged with building essentially a home improvised explosives factory in his house. He had a van that was full of these things, and he's now accused of conducting ambush killings of police officers. And by the way, just to be clear, a lot of this happened on video. There's tons of witnesses to all of this. So this isn't a situation where it seems as though the government is trying to, quote unquote, set up somebody, right? In fact, it actually was a local citizen that lived near him, a neighbor, who was able to stop him and tackle him to the ground. I think the guy was like a high school, on the high school wrestling team, and pinned the guy to the ground before more police could come. We do not know if he worked alone, so there's no indications on that. Again, this is all still going, but he had a wife a couple years back who committed suicide in 2018, and he had 2 young children who live with their grandparents, and so the grandparents also live in that area. This is their hometown, his hometown, and he was given a quality of life transfer from where he was. I think this is in Fort Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey at one point, and then it was brought back to Travis Air Force Base so he could work there. So yeah, 2 young kids. So their mother, unfortunately, who was also Air Force, she committed suicide in 2018, and now their father has been arrested for killing police officers, and potentially also killed a federal. Well, he's under federal investigation for the killing of a federal agent. That is yet to be determined. So I'm not going to go any further on that one. But what I do is I study information warfare, which means I study propaganda. And as an information warfare officer, excuse me, yeah, sorry, had to be done. Even though this is a study of propaganda, so we now see somebody who's and this is sort of the horseshoe theory in effect in real time. So in a horseshoe story in effect in real time, now you've got somebody who is sort of anti-government from a libertarian perspective, but then became radicalized and switched to an anti-fascist, almost a pro-Antifa standpoint. I don't think this guy seems to be a member of Antifa. He certainly doesn't seem like he was a member of any groups. But he did have a post at one point that said, who needs Antifa to start riots when the police are doing it for them? So it was an interesting post that didn't seem necessarily against Antifa, but sort of seemed as though he was a fellow traveler. You guys have heard me when I describe Antifa in the past as the greens, the yellows, and the reds. So when I talk about the structure of Antifa, the greens are sort of the disaffected college kids, the layabouts, the people without a job who just want to throw on their Gucci ninja costume and go quote unquote protest the system. And they don't really do much of anything. They just kind of march around and look weird in black on mommy and daddy's money while they're living in gentrified row homes. Then, of course, you've got the yellows. The yellows are the ones that are definitely more woke to what's going on. They're the organizers. They're the leaders. They're possibly involved in the funding of local chapters and local groups. But then you have the reds, and the reds are the ones that are actually committing various acts of direct action. So when I was assaulted by Antifa, 2017, 3 years ago, you know, I cover a lot of ground, but people actually don't realize that I've been covering Antifa for that many years now. But when I was assaulted by Antifa, I was actually attending an Antifa event. I was out in the open. It was a public recruitment event that they were holding in Washington, D.C., near a college campus, George Washington University. And I was interviewing people there for about 30 minutes. Then Lacey McCauley, who at the time was the leader of DC Antifa, made a phone call to someone. That person came by and then later assaulted me when they started screaming, "Get the Nazi!" So you can see right there from the perspective, the Greens being people who are just sort of milling about at the at the at the event. Then the yellows, like Lacey McCauley, who are the leaders, and then the reds would be the individual who actually attacked me, and that's Sidney Lurie Ramsey. He later, of course, I pressed charges. I saw him in court, and I made sure that he went to jail. So he went behind bars for his assault on me. I also participated in helping get Antifa arrested, and in 2016, when I infiltrated Antifa groups in early 2016, so that would be, or I guess late 2016 rather, late 2016, in the run up to the inauguration. So I actually attended Antifa meetings, I videotaped Antifa meetings right there in Washington, D.C., where they were planning to attack my event itself. My event called the Deplorable, which was an inaugural ball I threw with my deplorable friends. And later James O'Keefe was able to get those guys on tape who were planning a terrorist attack, an acid attack on my guests, my family, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, my mom, my dad, my brother, and we had about 1,000 guests at our event. They were gonna use an acid attack on them, and they were arrested for essentially planning a terrorist attack on our event. And so I'm one of the very few, possibly only, not the only probably, but one of the very few, I suppose you could say, commentators and analysts out there who have actually put Antifa behind bars, who have pressed charges on Antifa. There's a lot of people, now since that time frame, there's been a lot of other people that have finally come around to understanding this threat and have joined us in journaling them and chronicling them and understanding this threat. And so there's new people that have come into it, and I'm very glad that people, for those of us who have been doing it for a very long time, I'm glad that there's new people that are lending their voices to this emerging threat in the United States. And some people like Laura Logan, who are just incredible award-winning journalists, now coming in and joining in this fight, and it's really truly amazing to have her support. She gave me a very nice shout out the other day. And I really, really glad to stand shoulder to shoulder with Laura. Now, looking at this case, I want to go back a little bit to this case in Santa Cruz, and it's troubling for me because now there are individuals, and of course James O'Keefe, no question. But no, I just mentioned James O'Keefe. Sorry, I'm looking at the comments. Yeah, O'Keefe and I were working on this all the way back in 2016, and so there are higher level radicals now that are being affected by Antifa propaganda. And what this is, it looks to me like a classic case of self-radicalization. So essentially, it looks to me like it is in terms of ISIS or in radical Islam, we would call it an ISIS-inspired attack, right? When something like this happens, and unfortunately, it looks as though this is an Antifa-inspired cop killing. And so we're getting very close to the point, and I think the San Francisco Chronicle is sort of dancing around that point, but we've got a case now, and I think I've laid that out throughout the course of this podcast, and please share this out with everybody to understand this is the emerging threat. This is the new trend that we absolutely have to watch, because this is a guy who had military training, elite training, physical combat training, had the ability to make pipe bombs, had the ability to make improvised explosive devices, and conducted ambush killings with an AR-15 of police officers. So according to the San Francisco Chronicle, he made anti-fascist posts on his Facebook immediately before conducting the one attack that we know, we're pretty sure at least, he's been accused of, and he is still under investigation for the murder of a federal officer in Oakland. Yes, he is locked up. Some people are asking. And so this is very troubling, because now this potentially allows Antifa to open the door to a level of recruits that they never really had before. Veterans and military. And keep in mind, if this guy is the Air Force equivalent of an MP, that means he's military police, right? This is extremely troubling. It's extremely troubling if people with these types of skill sets start to join into Antifa, okay? And yeah, I was actually, some people are asking, how did I know about this? I was told about this situation back on Saturday. I didn't have the full information yet, but one of my sources did reach out to me and tell me that a military guy had been arrested in connection to pipe bombs and in connection to an attack on police. And I thought it was this case. I didn't have the name at the time, but my source told me on Saturday this is what went on. For those of you out there that I told about this at the time, you know exactly who I'm talking about. You know I've sent you the signal messages, and so this just goes to confirm that source that I was talking to last week. And so we need to be very careful with this. We need to be very vigilant of this, because if Antifa, and we know, by the way, we know certainly that, and I was the one who really pushed back on the story and made sure to get the story out there 100% accurately about Antifa's training overseas with the PKK link groups in northeastern Syria, the Rojava Revolution. And so this is a huge issue for those people coming back to the United States. This essentially amounts to foreign fighter flow. We're going to see TTP transfer now between a terrorist designated group, the PKK, who are communists in they're Middle Eastern communists, and Antifa. This is similar to the tactics flow relationship that once existed in the 1970s between the IRA, so the Irish Republican Army, and the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So you've got these ultra-nationalist terrorist groups, one in Ireland, one in Palestine, but back at that time, this was an infamous relationship, an infamous training relationship that they had in order to cooperate, to bolster one another's causes, even though, of course, I think an Irish nationalist and a Palestinian nationalist probably don't have very much in common on the face of things. What they did have in common was, of course, terrorism. All right, checking very quickly. Are there any questions before we drop out? Are Antifa paid directly? No, they're not paid directly. Will I attend the Trump rally? When they announce it, I'm sure I will. When our this gentleman was arrested in the Redwood Forest outside of Santa Cruz earlier this weekend. Why Santa Cruz? That's where he lived. Was he seeing the psych? I don't think so. Was Antifa definitely in the New York riots? Yes, at one point they were. How do you get on my Signal messages? I'm not giving you guys my access to my Signal server. If you get to the point where you do have information that you need to send me, if you are a source that's trying to reach out to me from encrypted, Jack Poso at protonmail.com. It's JACKPOSO at protonmail.com. So go check that out. And you say, can I speak any Arabic? No. I speak Mandarin, a little bit of Russian, but no, not any Arabic. I know like shukran, basically. Yeah, Guantanamo, we had plenty of interpreters, so it wasn't necessary for me. Yeah, this guy was in the Air Force for a long time. He deployed to Kuwait at one point, so it looks like he bounced around quite a bit. I don't have his full training jacket and his full record. Yeah, I put out a tweet a couple of days ago. I see a lot of people are very interested in the funding, so there's various Antifa front groups, and those various front groups have their own funding lines, some through direct donations, like Unicorn Riot. Unicorn Riot is an Antifa media organization that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decided to promote today. So Ocasio-Cortez today committed an act of financial support for Antifa, who is actually it's an international terrorist group. I don't know why we played this game of trying to call them a domestic terrorist group when they've conducted activities in Canada, the United States, and all across Western Europe. This is clearly an international group, and therefore it is certainly eligible for the international terrorist designation. And I think it's very interesting. It's clearly a group primarily made up of European individuals of European descent. Of course, Antifa originally came from Europe in the 1930s. It was founded by the Soviet Union as a way of, and the phrase Antifa itself is really just a propaganda phrase that was created by the Soviet Union in order to trick gullible liberals into supporting communism. Are there political activists in the military? Yes, there are. My goodness, yes, there are. And the intelligence. I mean, guys, if you think the intelligence community is bad, I mean, think of everything that we've learned from about the intelligence community over the past 3 years or so. Then from that, imagine what the military is like. So yes, there are left-wing political activists in the military as well. Do I think he was self-radicalized or influenced? I don't have any information to say that this guy was a member of an organization. I don't, from what I've seen, it doesn't appear that he was part of an organization. But I do believe that he was somebody who was self-radicalized. It appears to be an Antifa-inspired attack, not an organized attack. Somebody asked, how can we help? So helping at this point is understanding the threat. spreading the word, getting the message out. You know, when Rudy Giuliani was going after the mafia in the 1980s in New York, there were elements of the mainstream media that refused to admit that the mafia existed. They said it was a figment of Rudy Giuliani's imagination, that he was making it up, that it was completely false. They weren't real. There were people throughout the 1990s who said that Osama bin Laden was not a threat. They said that Osama bin Laden was, off living in the desert on the other side of the planet, that he didn't need to be taken out, that he posed no actual material threat to the United States. And in fact, Bill Clinton at a fundraiser once bragged that he had the opportunity to take out bin Laden in Kandahar, but later declined, stating that he thought it was a great act of mercy that he had done. The date of that fundraiser was September 10th, 2001. He was in Australia. So there you go. There you go. But anyway, so and by the way, I don't mean to say that I think Antifa is capable of conducting something like 9/11. However, what I am saying is that when people declare themselves your enemy, when people declare themselves the enemy of your country, I think that you should pay attention. And I think that these groups, whether it's an Antifa group or a bunch of people spreading Boogaloo memes, or a couple of rich jihadis on the other side of the planet, once they get together, they start forming their network, they start conducting low-level attacks, and things begin to escalate. Remember, for Ramzi Youssef, 1993 was the first bombing of the World Trade Center in a rented, I think it was a Ryder truck. Then later, 2001, with the actual downing of the Twin Towers, went back to finish the job. And so this is something that we see. We see escalation of threats. We see the increase in groups. And as these mass events grow, so as peaceful protests grow, Antifa is then able to use them to recruit and get people to their cause. They're then able to, when viral videos like the George Floyd video go out, Antifa is able to use that in their propaganda, their anti-government propaganda. And this is a big sticking point for me is these anti-government groups. And that's why I am critical of people who share the Boogaloo meme, because the essential understanding meme warfare and understanding information warfare is something that I've studied for a very long time, not only in the military, but of course I studied propaganda when I lived in China. And the Boogaloo meme represents an anti-government uprising. That is not something that is called for in this country. It is an attempt to bring armed militia forces together against the U.S. government. So that's absolutely something that I denounce. That's absolutely something that is completely uncalled for. And I've gone on record for a very long time that I denounce any group that uses that stands for political violence. It's really a no-brainer for me to say that. So going all the way back to 2016, I've said this: denounce any group that's racism, racial supremacy of any kind. And certainly, starting back in 2017, I led the rally against the normalization of political violence. You guys may remember that I attended the Shakespeare in the Park play back in the summer of 2017 because of their normalization of political violence, the violent stabbing of President Trump depicted every night there in Central Park. And I with a certain friend of mine, stormed the stage. You guys know her. She's running for Congress, Laura Loomer. And we were victorious in making our stand. And this is is a key distinction of the new right and the old right. The new right takes action. The new right stands up for our beliefs. The new right isn't afraid to take the fight directly into the belly of the beasts, if you will, whereas the old right was contorting themselves in knots. They couldn't figure out what to do. They couldn't figure out why a protest, would be done. So this is the new right. Someone just said that was me. Yes, yes, that was me. It's literally me. The video you have seen of that was my video filming it. I then turned to address the crowd, and I said that you are all Joseph Goebbels. Yeah, you are all Nazi propagandists. And oh no, I said Goebbels would be proud. Goebbels would be proud. Yeah, so basically, long story short, is raising awareness of this. The far left is trying to perpetuate a meme that Antifa doesn't exist right now, and so the more we can explain that these anti-government groups have conducted attacks, have conducted acts of extremism, have certainly conducted doxing, have conducted hate campaigns, harassment campaigns, the more we present that information out to the world. And here's what's key is the concrete milkshakes. Of course, you remember I broke the story about the concrete milkshakes last year. They claimed that I had made it up. They claimed I was lying. Media Matters was freaking out at me and Paul Joseph Watson and Laura Ingraham for talking about that. And then what did we see in New York tonight? We saw in New York tonight the commissioner of the NYPD stated that concrete was found disguised as ice cream today in New York City, or at least over the weekend. So, once again, a quote unquote made up story from Jack Posobiec of One American News actually was 100% correct. So, and funny how that works. Funny how that works. These guys, I don't get why they run cover. Well, I do get why they run cover for Antifa, but it's getting to be a little bit old. It's getting to be a little bit old. And they wanted to say that I didn't know about pipe bombs. Excuse me, I was the first person to talk about pipe bombs. Then you saw the Boogaloo Boys get arrested for it. Now you've seen this guy up in Santa Cruz get arrested for it. So we've been talking about pipe bombs for a long time now. I broke the story ahead of the new trend. Now you're seeing pipe bombs and Molotov cocktails used across the country. All right, so that's about all the time I've got for now. So for myself, to all of you, I would simply like to say, ladies and gentlemen, you have my permission to lay ashore.